We have just been looking at the Satipatthana Sutta, getting started with that. And we're looking at what is called the Satipatthana formula in brief, the brief explanation of the Satipatthana formula. And the idea here is that it gives you some basic instructions on what your mental state should ideally be when you do Satipatthana meditation. And I was talking about when the mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body, keen, aware, mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. So these are the kind of mental qualities we're supposed to have, and we were coming to the last one, the idea of rid of desire and aversion for the world. And what exactly does this mean? And basically what this means is that the desire is basically ordinary desire, especially desire in the world of the five senses. When we say for the world, this is loke, it means in the world. So in the world, in this kind of context, seems to mean the world of the five senses, the ordinary world that we are in. So you're rid of desire in that world and aversion in that world. Aversion means rejecting things in that world. It's like the opposite of desire. Desire, the opposite of desire is not ill will. The opposite is aversion, is the pushing away. It's something you don't like because it's you don't want to have anything to do with it. And what is interesting about this expression, abhijja domanassa, which it is in the Pali language, is that it is also found in the four right efforts. In the four right efforts, it is said that you have the mindfulness and the awareness, and you restrain the six faculties in such a way as to avoid the desire and aversion that we're talking about here. The same expression, abhijja domanassa, that is found in the four right efforts. So the point here is that in the four right efforts, you overcome this problem. That is the job of the four right efforts, is to overcome desire and aversion. And then when you come to Satipatthana, you have overcome it. That's why it says rid of desire and aversion, because you have already overcome it during the previous step on the path, which is the four right efforts. So here you are rid, so you can see how it is structured, how the one thing leading to the next one, the same wording is being used. In one place, you are actively overcoming it. In the next instance, when you come to the meditation, which is here, then you have overcome it because you did that job previously, during the previous step of the path. So this now gives you a kind of a nice idea what the mind of someone doing meditation is supposed to be like. These are the mental aspects. So first of all, rid of desire and aversion for the world means that you have subdued the kind of obvious desires and aversions in regard to that world. There may still be some very subtle desires left. It doesn't mean that you are completely rid of desire, but it is largely subdued. It is subdued so that you are able to be mindful. The mind is no longer running around into the past and the future and all of these kind of things. It is fairly stable. So this is a necessary prerequisite for mindfulness to be possible. You cannot be mindful and have a lot of desire and aversion, because desire and aversion pull the mind out of the present. It's impossible to stay in the present if desire is very strong. The same thing with aversion. So it is naturally goes together with mindfulness. So this gives you an idea of whether you are ready for meditation or not. It gives you an idea what you have to do in terms of calming down and relaxing at the beginning of meditation. You have to clear the mind of these kind of problems for mindfulness to arise. And then you have the idea of being keen. Keen here means that you have a degree of energy in the mind. The mind is not too sluggish or anything like that, but it has a sense of energy to it, a willingness to do the meditation. That is when this meditation becomes possible. So these are handy little pointers towards what kind of mind state is able to do the meditation practice. So let's look at the The next three, they're coming up straight away. Yeah. So the first one is about the body. The next one is you meditate observing an aspect of feelings. Keen, aware, mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. Yeah, so this is the aspect of feelings. And this is basically the kind of whether the experience is happy, unhappy, or neutral. Yeah, and you will notice here it is an aspect of feeling. It is not all feelings. There tends to be only one feeling at the time, and then you focus on that particular feeling. Now, an important point here is that we are moving. Yeah, remember everything in Buddhism is structured. Everything has a sequence. The sequence is never random. So body comes first, then comes feelings. Yeah, and we shall see later on when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta, the idea of mindfulness of breathing, why this is the natural sequence. The feelings here are generally positive feelings that arise out of meditation practice by focusing on the breath. And you focus on one aspect of those feelings at the time, because when we meditate, things tend to move slowly. One feeling is usually present. When you feel bliss, you don't usually feel the other feelings, etc. So an aspect of feeling here. Then you meditate observing an aspect of the mind, keen, aware, mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. So again, the mind can be understood as having many different aspects to it. Yeah, there can be mind that is beautiful and elevated and clear and kind of really large and expanded. There can be mind which is really contracted. There can be mind which has all kind of defilements to it. And there can be the mind which is free of these defilements. Then you are aware of these different aspects of the mind. And again, there is a natural sequence here. So the mind contemplation usually comes after the feeling contemplation. It is getting more and more profound as we move forward. And again, we'll see how this works out once we get to the mindfulness of breathing later on. And then we have the last one. You meditate observing an aspect of principles, keen, aware, and mindful, rid of desire and aversion for the world. Yeah, so principles here is really, the Pali word is Dhamma, and it can be understood as phenomena, that you contemplate on phenomena, but it can also be understood as understanding causality in Buddhism, because the idea of causality is very important. So it then means we understand why the defilements are present, for example. What are the causes that bring them around? And when we understand causality, then if you do something with the cause, then of course you also do something with the result. So for this reason, it is very useful to have an idea of causality here. So this is the introductory paragraph to the Satipatthana Sutta. And if you want to know about Satipatthana, this is maybe the most important part of the entire Satipatthana Sutta. This is the part which is found throughout the suttas. Whenever you read the suttas broadly, you go to the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, you find the Satipatthana Samyutta, that is all the discourses on Satipatthana practice collected in one place, 50 discourses. This is what you see. This paragraph is the significant one. So this is the standard way that Satipatthana is explained in the suttas. And because it is the standard way, you can take it that it is the most meaningful aspect or part of the Satipatthana Sutta. Yeah, so quite important. Now, of course, the Satipatthana Sutta itself has much more content. We're going to now have a quick look at the content of the Satipatthana Sutta. And this is actually quite interesting here, because what we're going to do now, we're going to do an analysis of this content. And we want to, one of the things that I have always been very interested in my monastic life, that is, what did the Buddha actually teach? Yeah, and can we be 100% reliant on just reading the suttas, or do we have to investigate a bit more deeply? This is kind of one of those very interesting questions to ask. And one of the things about the Satipatthana Sutta, which is particularly fascinating, is that when you compare the different versions of the Satipatthana Sutta, And by different versions, I mean the sutta belonging to different schools of Buddhism. Just to give you a little bit of background so you can understand what I'm talking about. The history of Buddhism is such that not so long after the Buddha passed away, say 200 years after the Buddha passed away, around the time of Ashoka, maybe only 150 years, 200 years, the Buddhism started to split up. It started to go to different parts of India. So you had what is now the Theravada Buddhism went to Sri Lanka, and became established in Sri Lanka and has been there ever since. Other schools went to the north of India. So there were the monks who went to the north, they eventually became the forefathers of the Sarvastivadin school of Buddhism, a very important school of Buddhism. Another school that went to the north of India went a little bit further north, a little bit further west to Gandhara, present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, and these things. They became known as the Dharmaguptaka school. And then in central India, around where Buddhism started out, all the schools were present to some extent, including the Mahasangika. The Mahasangika was another very important school of early Buddhism. Those are some of the most important ones. There are other ones as well, Pugalavada school, for example, and a whole host, 18 schools is usually counted at the beginning, but of those 18, only a few are really important and significant. So what happened when the Sangha dispersed in this way? They established separate schools, and after a while, those schools would start to create their own understanding of the Buddhist teachings, right? The Sarvastivadin schools would have their commentaries and how they understand the teaching. The Theravada would have their commentaries and how they understood the teachings. Mahasangika would have their understanding of how to understand the suttas. And so gradually they became a little bit different, and they started to think about the suttas in different ways. And because they kept the suttas independent of each other, the Sarvastivadins, they would recite the suttas together with other Sarvastivadins. The Theravadins would recite the suttas together with other Theravadins. Because they were kept apart like this, even the suttas started to differ a little bit. And what we know from that history is that there were things added to the suttas. Sometimes they would add things because it just seemed natural. It seemed kind of reasonable to add things, not because they wanted to destroy anything or they wanted to damage Buddhism, but simply because they thought it was natural to add. And what is interesting here, one of the suttas that had been added to the most seems to be the Satipatthana Sutta, which is kind of astonishing when you think about it, because Satipatthana Sutta is taken to be so important in Theravada Buddhism. It's like the core idea of what the Buddha taught. This is the pristine teaching of the Buddha going all the way back to the time of the Buddha himself. But actually, that is not the case at all. Satipatthana Sutta is one of the most changed suttas, probably in the whole Pali Canon. And one of the reasons for that is because it is very easy to add to the Satipatthana Sutta. Satipatthana Sutta, it comes in blocks, and because it comes in blocks, it is very easy to add new blocks in there, and blocks that seem as if they belong there. It seems reasonable to add these things, right? So what I want to discuss now is I want to, as we go through this, we have already looked at most of these exercises already in the Kayagata Sati Sutta, the mindfulness to the body. What I want to look at now is see if we can discern a little bit more about what is the original Satipatthana Sutta. And as we do that, one of the result of doing all of that, I can tell you the result in advance, just to make life more easy for you. Don't have to be too worried. And the result in advance is that basically Satipatthana mainly is about one thing. It is about mindfulness of breathing. That is the main thing that Satipatthana is about. The Satipatthana is just one way of thinking about the process of mindfulness of breathing. It's a little bit more than that, but that is kind of the essence of Satipatthana practice. So this is kind of nice, right? It makes it very simple and we can understand what is going on. So how do we arrive at that conclusion? So to see this, we will start with the observing the body or contemplating the body. This is called Kaya Nupassana. And we will, so let's see what comes up here. I can't remember exactly what comes up. Okay, so what comes up here is precisely this comparative study. So we're going to look at observing the body, and we're going to look at which parts of observing the body are found in the different schools. Yeah. So remember, in the Pali Satipatthana Sutta, observing the body has 6 parts to it. First of all, you have the mindfulness of breathing. Yeah. Then you have the 4 postures. Then you have the situational awareness or clear comprehension, number 3. Then you have the 31 parts of the body, number 4. Then you have the 4 elements, number 5. And then finally, you have the cemetery contemplation. So there's 6 kind of ways of doing the body contemplation according to the Satipatthana Sutta. Yeah. So how many of these are found in other schools or in other systems? This is what we want to look at now. So here we go. This is what comes up next here. So this is very exciting if you haven't seen this before. Whoa, look at this. This is kind of cool. So we have at the very top there, you can see the contemplation of, it should have said contemplation of body. There's a mistake there at the top. So this is a comparison of the various sources. Yeah. So first of all, just to give you an idea what is meant by these various sources here. Yeah. So you have here, you have the Pali source at the very top row is where we are now. You can see the Pali source is there. And then you have the Sarvastivadin version of the sutta. The Sarvastivadin is found in Chinese translation in the present day. If you are to read the suttas in Chinese, the ancient Chinese, the Chinese that was translated almost 2,000 years ago, this is what you would read, and you would read that Sarvastivadin version. Then we have the Ekayana Sutra. This is a sutra which maybe belongs to the Mahasangika school. Yeah, this is also a version of the Satipatthana Sutta. It's found in the Ekottara Agama, which is the equivalent of the Anguttara Nikaya. The Sarvastivadin Sutta is found in the Madhyama Agama, which is like the Majjhima Nikaya. Then we have the Prajna Paramita Sutta. This is also found in Chinese language and Sanskrit as well. And this is a Mahayana Sutta, but within that Mahayana Sutta, there is also Satipatthana, which is kind of interesting. This is not such an important source, but it's still interesting just to compare it to the others. And then the last 3 sources here are actually quite interesting, because the last 3 here, they are Abhidhamma sources. So the Vibhanga is the Pali Abhidhamma. What does the Pali Abhidhamma have to say about Satipatthana? Dharmaskanda is the Sarvastivadin Abhidhamma. What does the Sarvastivadin Abhidhamma have to say about Satipatthana? And the Sariputra Abhidharma is the Dharmaguptaka Abhidhamma. This is the Abhidhamma of the Dharmaguptaka school. And perhaps you wonder, why am I talking about Abhidhamma? I always say bad things about the Abhidhamma. I'm never too keen on the Abhidhamma because it goes too far into becoming a philosophy rather than becoming about Buddhism. And the reason why it is included here is because there are parts of the Abhidhamma that are very closely related to the suttas. There's a part of the Abhidhamma known as the Suttanta Bhajaneya, which means the analysis according to the suttas. And it's almost exactly what you find in the suttas. But what is interesting is what you find here is actually a little bit different from the suttas. And that makes it like a separate source. It is possible that the Abhidhamma, this part of the Abhidhamma, was established before the sutta, the Satipatthana Sutta, started to change. Yeah, this could very well be a very early version of Satipatthana because of the nature, it takes time often for changes to take place. So for that reason, it's actually interesting here to look. In this case, it is interesting to look at the Abhidhamma, what the Abhidhamma has to say about this, because it is an Abhidhamma that is close to the suttas. So these are the sources. Yeah. So now let us see what they actually have in common. It's a shame in a sense that we haven't got even more sources, because it would have been interesting to kind of have even more sources. But unfortunately, this is all we have. Remember that initially 2,500 or 2,200 years ago, there have been a vast amount of sources. All the various schools would have had their own version of Satipatthana. We could go back and compare all of these things, yeah, and that would have been very interesting. But now we are limited to a much smaller number. We have things in Pali, we have things in Sanskrit, we have things in Chinese translation, we have some things in Tibetan translation, and we have some things in various kind of Indian languages called Prakrits. And that is really what we have left. And that is what we're working with. Still, this fact that we have all of these different languages is almost like a revolution in Buddhism. This is an entirely new way to think about Buddhism. Because 150 years ago, that is when this kind of investigation started. And even now, these kind of investigations are in their infancy, just really happening quite recently. These things have never really been known about in Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism has always been very kind of centered on one country. People weren't aware that there were Chinese scriptures, Tibetan scriptures, Sanskrit scriptures, and all of these kind of things. That has only come to light more recently. And it's only now that we start to have this ability to compare the suttas in this way. And it gives us a lot of new information about the suttas. It's a fairly modern thing. Otherwise, maybe it sounds like I am incredibly conceited. Why should I know about the suttas? Why should I know more than anyone else? Well, it's not that I know more, but it's just that in the modern times, we have this additional information that actually is quite new and quite revolutionary in some ways. So here are then this table of all the various schools, the Abhidhamma, the suttas, and all of these kind of things. And it shows you which ones of these ways of doing Satipatthana are in common between all the schools. Which schools have the various exercises. So if you start with mindfulness of breathing, on the left side there you can see the mindfulness of breathing. So you can see that the mindfulness of breathing is found in the Pali. The equal sign means that it exists in that collection. It is found in the Pali. It is found in the Sarvastivada, which is the Madhyama Agama in Chinese translation. It is found in the Prajna Paramita, which is a little bit of a side issue, but anyway. And it's also found in the Sariputra Abhidharma, which is the Abhidhamma of the Dharmaguptaka school. So if we take out the Prajna Paramita, which is a Mahayana text, you can see it is only found in half of the sources we have, only half the sources. It is not found in the Vibhanga, which is a Theravada Abhidhamma text. It is not found in the Ekayana Sutra, which is the Mahasangika school, one of the great schools of ancient India, and nor is it found in the Dharmaskanda, which is another Abhidhamma text of the Sarvastivada. It's only found in half the sources. So what does that mean? Well, what it means that mindfulness of breathing is unlikely to have been there as part of the earliest Satipatthana Sutta, because if it was there from the very beginning, you would expect to find it in all the sources, because no one would throw out the word of the Buddha. They might add something, but they don't normally throw things out, because that is considered like sacrilegious, if you like, to use a Christian term. So that means that mindfulness of breathing is not part of body contemplation. That's kind of interesting, because how can that be? I was just saying before that mindfulness of breathing is the main way of practicing Satipatthana. So how come it does not belong in body contemplation? That's kind of strange. Am I contradicting myself? And the answer is no, not really, because the problem is that when you have mindfulness of breathing in body contemplation, and then in the other contemplation, you don't have mindfulness of breathing, because when we look at the other contemplations later on, the Vedana, this is just the body here. When we look at the feelings, the mind, and the Dhamma, there is no mention of breathing there. In those places, there's no mention of the breath. So the impression you get when you read the Satipatthana Sutta is that breath meditation only belongs with the body. It does not belong with the other ones. But that is wrong. We know that that is wrong because when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta, the mindfulness of breathing Sutta, mindfulness of breathing fulfills all the four satipatthanas. It goes all the way through. Yeah. And this is why it is misleading to have mindfulness of breathing under body contemplation, because it gives you a sense that mindfulness of breathing is a very small thing. It only belongs to body contemplation, but it does not belong to the more advanced contemplation, the advanced contemplation of feeling, of mind, and of dhammas. So mindfulness of breathing, you might think, if you only read the Satipatthana Sutta, that it is a very limited and small thing. And then when you get more advanced, then you go to the feelings of the body. Yeah, this is a very common thing that we are taught in Theravada Buddhism. You go to the feelings of the body because mindfulness of breathing is finished. You do mindfulness of breathing the first few days of the retreat, then you go to the feelings of the body. But I say that's the wrong way. I think that is not necessarily wrong, but it's actually not the main way that the Buddha talks about meditation practice. Mindfulness of breathing takes you all the way. Watching feelings in the body is never talked about the Buddha anywhere. Yeah, there is no reason why we should be just watching feelings in the body in a kind of general sense like that. So you can see here, once we start to change how we look at the sutta, it changes how we think about meditation practice. We think about meditation in a new way. We start to think, maybe I shouldn't be watching the feelings in the body in that way, because maybe the Buddha didn't really teach that. Later on, we will see when we come to the mindfulness of the mind, the Chitta Nupassana, contemplation of the mind. There are teachers in Theravada that talk about just watching the mind all the time, yeah, and they call that mindfulness of the mind. But if we follow what I've been saying now, the real mindfulness of the mind, which I'll see later on, actually also happens with the breath, because breath goes all the way through, yeah. So actually, mindfulness of breathing does not belong under body contemplation, and the reason is because it belongs under the whole of Satipatthana. It is the main way of practicing Satipatthana, doing Satipatthana practice, and we shall see this later on with much more clarity once we come to the mindfulness of breathing. I hope you're able to follow me. I don't know if it is too complicated and too hard to follow. Not sure. Maybe it's bad timing, yeah, straight after lunch. And maybe, I don't know if you have eaten too much or you had a good cup of coffee or not. But I realize that these things can be a bit technical straight after lunch. So please feel free to ask questions about these things, and then I can try to explain this in more detail later on. Please don't be shy about holding back. If you think your question is very like a beginner question, or maybe you think your question is a bit stupid, this is what everyone thinks. Oh, my question is a bit stupid. I'm afraid of asking. That's usually the thing that stops people from asking questions. But usually, in my experience, the stupid questions are usually really good questions. So don't be afraid. Don't hold back. Yeah. So that is the first one. Then we come to the second one, the four postures. And you see the case of the four postures is exactly the same as it is with the mindfulness of breathing. Only half the sources have the four postures. That is, if we disregard the prajna paramita, which is in the Mahayana tradition, and it's exactly 3 of each. So again, it looks like the four postures are not really part of Satipatthana practice. And this makes sense. Yeah, this is what I was discussing before at the beginning of this retreat. We were looking at the Kaya Gata Sati Sutta, the mindfulness directed to the body. And I was saying that the four postures actually are not really meditation. They are a preliminary practice leading up to meditation. They come before meditation practice. Yeah. And I made the point that it is very similar to situational awareness, the next one. It is about being aware of what you're doing, have a mindfulness about what you're doing so as to overcome unnecessary defilements. It is what allows you to practice Satipatthana later on. It is not part of Satipatthana, it is what leads up to Satipatthana. And then the same thing for the situational awareness, the third one we have here on the column on the left. Again, only 3 of the sources have situational awareness. 3 don't, again leaving out the prajna paramita. Yeah, so again, it doesn't really belong in the Satipatthana Sutta. And of course, it doesn't, because it is not really about meditation. It is about understanding your postures in daily life, knowing whether you're doing the right thing, knowing whether you are giving rise to unnecessary defilements, having clear awareness about what is happening, the purpose, the suitability we were talking about last time. These are called the sa'attaka, and sapaya of this sampajanya. Yeah. So again, it is a preliminary exercise. What we do, that leads up to meditation practice. And in fact, this is exactly what we see in other suttas. In some suttas, you have sampajanya and you have satipatthana in the same sutta. Sampajanya always comes first. Satipatthana comes further down later on. So again, it makes sense. Yeah, we can see how things come together now, how things sort of become really much more clear. So these first 3 ways that are included in Satipatthana here probably do not belong in Satipatthana Sutta at all. Yeah. So now let's come to the part which may be part of Satipatthana. Now we come to the 31 parts of the body. And again, now this is very interesting. Every single one of the sources we have includes the 31 parts of the body. This must mean that the 31 parts of the body is very likely to have been the earliest part of Satipatthana. If every source has it, it means that it must have been there from the beginning, and it was inherited probably from the Buddha himself. Yeah. Remember these schools, they started separating 150 to 200 years after the Buddha. We're very, very close to the Buddha. So if all of these schools have this after separation, very likely this is what the Buddha taught. So this is the real body contemplation. Yeah, the 31 parts of the body. This is where the Buddha was coming from. So why is that? How does this connect with the idea of mindfulness of breathing that I was talking about before? Because I'm saying mindfulness of breathing is the main way of doing Satipatthana. And the way that it connects is that if you do mindfulness of breathing, but you have had problems with the meditation practice, you have problems moving forward, going deeper in the meditation, well, one of the things that you have to do is to do body contemplation to reduce your attachment to the body, the desire for the body, which includes the desire for the 5 senses. Yeah. So this is like the one way of helping you to move forward in your mindfulness of breathing. This is why it is there. So there's 2 ways of doing the body contemplation, either the 31 parts of the body or the mindfulness of breathing. And sometimes you have to do both, so they support each other. Not at the same time, of course, but you have to do both, alternating a little bit, and then there will be a mutual support between these things. So that is the 31 parts of the body. Now let's look at the last 2 of these exercises, if you like. Then we have the 4 elements meditation. You remember the 4 elements from the Kaya Gata Sati Sutta. You can see here how every exercise is almost exactly the same. And what we find with the 4 elements is that all of the sources have it except for one. There's only one source that doesn't have the 4 elements, and that source is, you can't see it now because it has disappeared, but that source is the Vibhanga. Yeah, the Vibhanga is this source here. There you are, that's the Vibhanga for you. So the Vibhanga is a Theravada Abhidhamma text. Yeah? So the Theravada Abhidhamma does not have the 4 elements. All the other sources have them. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that the 4 elements is likely to be quite early because all the sources have them. But it is possible that in the very earliest period, these 4 elements did not exist. This could mean that the Vibhanga was actually something that was established in Theravada fairly early on. It's a fairly early text, quite possibly. Anyway, it's hard to say. But so 4 elements is the second most likely part of the Kaya Nupassana. Second most likely to be part of it. 31 parts of the body is the most certain aspect of contemplation of the body. The second most important, the second most likely to be original is the four elements. Yeah, and this is why the four elements contemplation can be quite interesting and powerful, because it leads again to this dispassion that allows you then to follow the breath and practice the breath meditation properly. Then we come to the charnel ground meditations. Yeah, and in this case there's two sources that don't have it. The Vibhanga and the Dharmaskanda, two different Abhidhamma texts, one belonging to Theravada, the other one belonging to Sarvastivada. All the others, they have the charnel ground meditations. So this is the third most likely to be original, because it is found in more texts. But so what is the overall idea here? Well, the overall idea is that it is the 31 parts of the body we can be most sure of is the original Kaya Nupassana body contemplation. Then, if we don't like that, well, then we can maybe go to the four elements, because it is the second most likely. That is really the kind of conclusion that we can draw from this kind of table. So keeping that in mind, now let us have a look at these exercises. We have had a look at them before, so we can have a fairly quick going through of all of these exercises now, because we already know what actually is in there. So let's see what comes. So here we have the mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, this is exactly the same as we saw before in the Kayagata Sati Sutta. So I will just read it out just for completeness. And then we can discuss this in detail when we come to the actual Anapanasati Sutta, the sutta on mindfulness of breathing. Yeah. And how does a mendicant meditate contemplating or observing an aspect of the body? It is when a mendicant gone to the wilderness or to the foot of a tree or to an empty hut sits down cross-legged with a body straight and focuses their mindfulness right there. Just mindful, they breathe in. Mindful, they breathe out. When breathing in heavily, they know I am breathing in heavily. When breathing out heavily, they know I am breathing out heavily. When breathing in lightly, they know I'm breathing in lightly. When breathing out lightly, they know I am breathing out lightly. They practice breathing in, experiencing the whole body. They practice breathing out, experiencing the whole body. They're practicing breathing in, stilling the body's motion. That's just the breath. They practice breathing out, stilling the body's motion. So that is how the breath meditation is explained in connection with the body. Yeah, and each step here is more profound than the previous one. So as we move on in these steps, it becomes deeper and deeper meditation, sharper and sharper mindfulness as we move on. I'll explain this in much more detail when we come to the mindfulness of breathing sutta. Then we have a simile. Oops. Let's have a look at this simile. It is like a deft carpenter or a carpenter's apprentice. We're making a deep cut, they know I am making a deep cut. And we're making a shallow cut, they know I am making a shallow cut. So in other words, it's just about being aware. Yeah, you're just aware of what is going on. You don't try to make the deep cut. It doesn't say that you deliberately do it. Yeah, it is rather just the idea that you know that you are making a deep cut. It's about knowing what is going on, not creating the deep breath or the shallow breath or the light breath or the heavy breath. That is already very useful information from that simile. Yeah, the idea that all you're doing is you are aware. You are aware of the depth. You don't make it deep. You don't make it shallow. This is kind of the important point here. And now comes a very interesting part of the sutta. This is very specific to the Satipatthana Sutta. And this is like the kind of broader context in which we do Satipatthana practice. And this particular paragraph we come to now is found after each type of meditation each kind of exercise, if you like, we find this paragraph every single time. So for that reason, it's a very important paragraph. So let's have a look at this and see what it has to say and analyze it a little bit. And so they meditate observing an aspect of the body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. They meditate observing the body as liable to originate, as liable to vanish, as liable to both originate and vanish. Or mindfulness is established that the body exists to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. They meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. So what is this all about? And what this is all about is different ways in which we approach the meditation on the breath. Yeah, and as we go down these various sentences here, it's like a sequence of different steps. The first one is the internal, external, both internal, external. As the meditation deepens, as you go deeper in this, then you have the origination, vanishing, and both originating and vanishing. And then it ends up with not grasping at anything in the world, which is the most profound part of this whole thing here. So the first part of this, internal, external, and both internal and external, that is all about samatha practice. It is all about calming down. It's all about bringing the mind to samadhi. And you may wonder, how can we know that? It's not kind of obvious at all. And the way we know that is that there are other suttas that show when you practice in this way, internally, externally, and both internally, externally, the mind reaches samadhi as a consequence. That's what this shows you, yeah? So we know that this part is about attaining samadhi, making the mind peaceful. It's about samatha, calming down the mind and becoming peaceful in this way. So this is the first part. Now, then you have the second part, originate, vanish, and both originate and vanish. Well, that is more like insight. It's more like seeing things according to reality, yeah? So it makes sense that the second part should then come after samadhi. It's a deeper aspect of satipatthana practice, yeah? It kind of makes sense. You can see how this is sequentially is very significant. The very first part about internal, external, and both internal and external, that it leads to samadhi, that fits with how satipatthana is explained everywhere in the suttas. Everywhere in the sutta is the seventh factor of the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to samma samadhi, that leads to the jhanas. That is exactly what we're seeing here again. So that fits very well with that. Whereas the second part, to originate and vanish, this is not as obvious. Yeah, this is only makes sense in the context of satipatthana being a path that goes all the way to the end of the path, all the way to becoming an arahant. But this is actually not so common in the suttas. Yeah, this is not such a common part of the satipatthana practice. So what is interesting then, when you compare this particular passage in the various schools of Buddhism, we just saw before, the various sources that we have, you find that the most common one, the one you find everywhere, is the internal, external, and both internal and external. Whereas the originate, vanish, and originate and vanish seems to be a slightly later addition, because it only exists in some sources. So what we can conclude from that, again, is that satipatthana is primarily a samadhi practice. The purpose is to bring the mind to samadhi. It is not really a vipassana practice as such. Well, actually, it is both, yeah, because samatha and vipassana always go together. So if it is a samadhi practice, it is also vipassana, because you cannot avoid seeing things clearly as you become more still in the mind. So they go together regardless. But the first one is more fundamental and a more basic way of understanding meditation. That is what leads you to samadhi, leads you to the stillness of the mind. So what does it mean internally here? Well, internally means that you are looking at your own breath. Yeah, you're practicing looking at your own breath. Externally means that you are looking at the breath of others. both external, internal, means that you are making a universal claim about all breaths having a certain nature. It's a universal kind of way of thinking about the breath. So it's kind of strange, isn't it? What do you mean, contemplate, observe the breath of someone else? How can you do that? Well, you can, maybe if you go on a retreat and the person next to you is breathing really, really heavily, well, maybe you can observe the breath, but that can't be the point. That seems very strange. And this, to me, again, is another pointer that anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, does not really belong here. It doesn't really belong to the Satipatthana Sutta. Because how can you think about the breath of another person? It's kind of irrelevant. Yeah, you don't really observe the other person's breath in this way. Why would you want to do that anyway? It is not really all that helpful. And it fits much better when it comes to the 31 parts of the body, because with the 31 parts of the body, your body is like this, other bodies are like that. You know that as a matter of, you can infer that because you know your own body, you know the bodies of others. So with the 31 parts of the body, internal, external makes good sense. With the breath, it makes much less sense. Of course, if you go to a Theravada retreat center, they will tell you why it makes sense, yeah, because this is kind of what they are obliged to do. They are obliged to interpret this in a certain way. They don't have that kind of historical context to understand these things, and so they will give you an explanation. But usually the explanation is not really satisfactory. You wonder if it makes more sense to leave mindfulness of breathing out of this whole thing. Yeah, that makes more sense. Anyway, so that is the idea here. Yeah, external, internal. Then you have the origination and vanishing, which really doesn't belong here either. But it is part of the deeper way of doing Satipatthana, perhaps doesn't really belong in the Satipatthana Sutta. Then you have that you are just mindful that the body exists, yeah, for the extent of knowledge and mindfulness. And it is a bit disputed exactly what that means. I guess it means that you have a degree of knowledge, a degree of mindfulness, yeah, the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness, and you are aware of the breath, and you are deepening this knowledge and mindfulness as you go along. Something like that. It's a little bit unclear. And then finally, as you come to the very end, you meditate independently, not grasping at anything in the whole world. And that is when this process matures all the way to the deepest point. Yeah. So starting from the very beginning, just observing, calming yourself down, developing samatha and vipassana. Then after samadhi, then you can see the origination and vanishing of things, especially the body and in fact all the five khandhas. We saw from the previous sutta, the longer sutta of the elephant's footprint, how one aspect like the body actually includes all the five khandhas, yeah, the entire experiential reality of body and mind. And then as you do that, you end up not grasping at anything in the world. So this is the this famous verse at the end, and you find this at the end of every single exercise in Satipatthana. So it's kind of important to understand roughly what it means. Of the things here, the most important part by far, to make it very clear once again, is internally, externally, and both internally and externally. That seems to be the original part of Satipatthana, and it really is all about samadhi, but stilling the mind. That's really what it is concerned with. And so it fits very well with the idea that anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, is the core part of Satipatthana practice. We have looked at the very first part of the Satipatthana Sutta, the mindfulness of breathing part. Now let us move on to the next part. And this is, as we have seen before, it is the four postures. So I'm going to just read it out very briefly again. Furthermore, when a mendicant is walking, they know I am walking. When standing, they know I am standing. When sitting, they know I am sitting. When lying down, they know I am lying down. Whatever posture their body is in, they know it. And then you have the same refrain as we had before, external, internal, origination and vanishing and all of that. And so I'm not going to talk much more about this because I've talked about this at length already. And just to note again that it does not really belong here. It belongs to an earlier part of the path before meditation practice. Then we have situational awareness, and this too belongs earlier on the path. So just for completeness, let me just read it out one more time. Furthermore, a mendicant acts with situational awareness. About, remember I said about is a better translation, about going out and coming back, about looking ahead and aside, about bending and extending the limbs, about bearing the outer robe, bowl, and robes, about eating, drinking, chewing, and tasting, about urinating and defecating, about walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, being awake, speaking, and keeping silent. So you have clear awareness about all those things. You know what the appropriate amount is, when to do these things, etc., so as to align with the practice of the path. So you practice the path better. And in this way, they meditate contemplating an aspect of the body internally, etc. That too is how a mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of the body. Now we come to the focusing on the repulsive. This is the 31 parts of the body. And this, again, we have been through already, so I will not say too much, but because this is a critical part of Satipatthana, as I said, this is probably the most early part of Satipatthana, the one that goes back to the time of the Buddha, very, very likely. So for this reason, it is particularly interesting here. So furthermore, a mendicant examines or investigates, or something like that, investigates, examines, contemplates their own body, up from the soles of the feet and down from the tips of the hairs, wrapped in skin and full of many kinds of filth or impurities, if you like. In this body, there is head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, undigested food, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, synovial fluid, and urine. So 31 parts of the body, no brain is to be found. So whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then you have this beautiful simile that we saw before. It is as if there were a bag with openings at both ends, filled with various kinds of grains. Such is the fine rice, wheat, mung beans, peas, sesame, and ordinary rice. And someone with good eyesight were to open it and examine the contents. These grains are fine rice, these are wheat, these are mung beans, these are peas, these are sesame, these are ordinary rice. In the same way, you observe or you contemplate or you reflect on an aspect of the body internally, externally, both internally, externally, etc., etc. That too is how mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of the body here. So when we discussed this last time, the question came up whether this was really a recommended practice for lay people, and it really depends on your commitment and depends on your situation, whether you are living in a relationship or singly, and what your kind of commitment to the Dhamma is. And if you're very, very committed, it can maybe be useful sometimes. But remember that the main meditation of focusing on the body here, or all meditation throughout, is actually the breath meditation. It's actually enough to do the breath meditation. If you find that you are really stuck or whatever, maybe you can do this as an additional thing just to help you a little bit. But generally speaking, I would not recommend it, because it is just not nice. It doesn't really add quality to your life. Sometimes it detracts from the quality of life. And the purpose of the spiritual path is to make the quality of life better. That is why we're here. We want to be more happy. We don't want to suffer more. So be very careful with these kind of things. Otherwise, you may destroy the joy of meditation, the joy of the Buddhist path. It's supposed to be something pleasant, something that we all enjoy. Then it is heading in the right direction. And an important part of that is this idea here that what we are doing is we are we are seeing this just like a bag, a bag full of various kinds of grain. And the grains, you see rice, you see mung beans, you see wheat. So it's more like a neutral way of just observing what is there. You observe what is there. Okay, wheat is there. No one gets disgusted by seeing wheat. No one gets disgusted by seeing mung beans. You might get hungry, but you're not going to get disgusted with it. So you see those things there. So it's like a neutral observation. It's just an understanding that this is the nature of this. It is not to actually make you repelled or make you upset with your body and wanting to destroy yourself, anything like that. So remember this neutrality of observing. So if you do this in the right way, it actually, all it leads to a sense of being dispassionate, a sense of the reduction in attachment and desire. That is the purpose. The purpose is not to get disgusted with the body, anything like that. So keep that in mind. But because it is an early part of the Satipatthana Sutta, I think it's important to at least consider it as a possible meditation object, because it goes back to the Buddha. On the other hand, it is also, I think, important to point out that it is not a very common thing found in the suttas. You don't find the 31 parts of the body in many places. It may be found in a handful of places in the suttas. So it's relatively rare, and as such, it is not considered anything tremendously important. Breath meditation, by contrast, is found much more often. Breath meditation is a fundamental part of the path, whereas this is not fundamental to quite the same way. And in many ways, I think the four elements meditation is at least as important in the suttas as the 31 parts of the body. And because it is as important, because it's found in many places, even though it may not have been part of the early Satipatthana Sutta, it is still an important meditation that is worthwhile doing, focusing on the elements. So let's have a quick look at the elements now. So furthermore, a mendicant examines their own body, whatever its placement or posture, according to the elements. In this body, there is the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. It is as if a deft butcher or a butcher's apprentice were to kill a cow and sit down at the crossroads with the meat cut into portions. Earth over here, this is kind of the hard parts, the bones or whatever, and you have the water over here, this is like the, urine or whatever, then you have the air over here, this is the breath, and then you have the fire over here, this is like the heat of the body into kind of nice little piles, and you see it all kind of piled up in this way here. And we have already looked at this in great detail in the Greater Sutta on the elephant's footprint, so I'm not going to talk about it more here, but just to say that it is an interesting meditation object because it seems to be fairly early. It's certainly part of the suttas elsewhere. So you meditate, observing the body internally, externally, and all of this, and that too is how mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of the body. Let's move on. I'm going a bit faster now because we have seen all of this before. We come to the charnel ground contemplations, and these are a little bit more obscure again. They occur only in 4 out of the 6 main sources for the Satipatthana Sutta, so not as important as the previous ones, the 2 previous ones. And in the overall view of the suttas, they're actually very rare. They're not very important at all. So it is something that it is really only for people with special interest that I would recommend these kind of contemplation. Still, let's just read through it once more, because it is here. It is in front of us, so we might as well read through it. That's kind of my idea anyway. So Let's just have a look at it. So furthermore, suppose a mendicant were to see a corpse discarded in a charnel ground, and it had been dead for 1, 2, or 3 days, bloated, livid, and festering. They would compare it with their own body. This body of mine is also of the same nature. It is the same kind. It has not gone beyond that kind of state. That too is how a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. Furthermore, suppose they were to see a corpse discarded in a charnel ground, being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, herons, dogs, tigers, leopards, jackals, and many kinds of little creatures, like worms and all kinds of things, and what have you. They would compare it with their own body. This body is also of that same nature, that same kind. It has not gone beyond that state, that reality here. That too is how a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. Furthermore, suppose they were to see a corpse discarded in a charnel ground, a skeleton with flesh and blood, held together by sinews, a skeleton without flesh but smeared with blood and held together by sinews, a skeleton rid of flesh and blood, held together by sinews, bones rid of sinews, scattered in every direction. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a shin bone, there a thigh bone, here a hip bone, there a rib bone, here a backbone, there an arm bone, here a neck bone, there a jaw bone, here a tooth, there a skull. And then white bones, the color of shells. Yeah, when you see old bones, you know what they look like. Yeah? Decrepit bones heaped in a pile, bones rotted and crumbled to powder. In that way, they would compare their own body to that. This body is also of that same nature, the same kind, and has not gone beyond that state. And then you have the summary, the kind of various kind of contemplations again. And so they meditate, observing an aspect of the body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. Yeah, this makes sense because you can relate this idea of the skeleton and the corpse, you can relate that to yourself and to other people. It's the same idea. All bodies are ultimately the same. They meditate, observing a body as liable to originate and to vanish, and both to originate and vanish. That kind of also makes sense in this context. Yeah, the vanishing of the body, the disappearance of all of these various aspects here, and then the origination when you get reborn. And then the mindfulness is established that the body exists to that extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. They meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. That too is how a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. So that is the end of the Kaya Nupassana, the contemplation of the body. And I have gone through this very quickly because we have already seen all of this through the contemplation of the body before, when we did the Kaya Gathasati Sutta, the mindfulness directed towards the body. So if you want to listen to that again to get a more clear idea, please do so. But now we come to new material. What comes up next is a contemplation of feeling, and we have not really looked at this before. So now it gets a bit more interesting because we're looking at new ground. So let's have a look at the contemplation of feeling. And just like the contemplation with the body, we will start off by looking at the various sources to see what they have in common. And what we will find here, which is kind of interesting, is that there is much more in common between all the sources. Yeah, it's the body contemplation in particular where there is a large degree of discrepancy, much more in common when it comes to the contemplation of feeling. So contemplation of feeling, the comparison of sources. Yeah, so you have the all the sources there, and then you have the various kinds of feeling on the left-hand side. Yeah, And so you can see here that the only source that doesn't have anything here, that is the Prajna Paramita, which is the Mahayana Sutra. And the reason it doesn't have anything is because that sutra only has the body contemplation. It is lacking all the other Satipatthanas. There's nothing there about feelings, nothing there about the mind, and nothing there about dhammas, the idea of principles or phenomena. So it doesn't really matter if the Prajna Paramita is missing these things, because it is obviously not meant to be a complete sutta. But what you can see here is that all the other sources have everything here, all the various aspects of feeling. They're all the same, all the way down to the very end. You can see it's all the same. And I should say that this looks more perhaps as if there is more agreement than there actually is. The reality is that there is not quite as much agreement as it seems here. And the reason for that is because some of these sources, they actually have additional feelings that are not found in the Pali. I haven't listed those things here because we are using the Pali as like the baseline. We are comparing everything with the Pali. So if other sources have more than what is in the Pali, I have not shown that actually in this kind of a chart. The same thing is true for the body contemplation. Some of the other sources have even more contemplations in body contemplation. I didn't show that to you. I probably should have, but I haven't, because I think there's a limit to how much we can actually see during this kind of course. So I'm just basing myself on the Pali here. So from the Pali idea, all of the things found in the Pali are found in all the sources, so we can assume that this is part of the common heritage of early Buddhism coming from the Buddha himself. So let's have a little bit more look at this and see what it actually amounts to. So, how does a mendicant meditate observing an aspect of feelings? It is when a mendicant feels a pleasant feeling, they know I feel a pleasant feeling. When they feel a painful feeling, they know I feel a painful feeling. When they feel a neutral feeling, they know I feel a neutral feeling. So it seems kind of obvious, it doesn't seem like very kind of it seems kind of okay, we can all do that, but let's go a little bit further down. When they feel a material or a worldly pleasant feeling, they know I feel a worldly pleasant feeling. When they feel a spiritually pleasant feeling, they know I feel a spiritually pleasant feeling. When they feel a material or worldly painful feeling, they know I feel a worldly painful feeling. When they feel a spiritually painful feeling, they know I feel a spiritually painful feeling. When they feel a worldly neutral feeling, they know I feel a worldly neutral feeling. When I feel a spiritual neutral feeling, they know I feel a spiritual neutral feeling. So these are the feelings, and you can see here that the main thing is that there are three kinds of feeling: happy, unhappy, and neutral. Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And then there is a division into worldly on the one hand and spiritual on the other hand. And that is really all there is to it. And if you combine all of that, you get 9 different kinds of cases. But really it's just about pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and then there is worldly and spiritual. And what is interesting about this is that a lot of these feelings you don't actually have to feel. One of the things that I was talking about before is that there's different ways of doing this kind of contemplation. Observing is only one way. You observe what is going on. Another way is to understand things by inference, not by direct observation, but by inferring, understanding something by its absence even. And this is what is so interesting about this particular case, is that all you really have to do with the contemplation of feelings is to contemplate happy feelings. We will see this later on when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta again. We will see there that you can fully do all the contemplation of feeling just by enjoying it. And that is so revolutionary. All you have to do is experience joy, and you understand the pain. You understand all the negative things by their absence. Because they're absent, because they are gone, you understand that these things are impermanent. You understand that they are painful. You understand that they are non-self. You don't actually have to watch them specifically. This is such an important point because there are so many meditation retreats. When you go on these retreats, they will tell you to watch the painful feelings. Watch the painful feelings and gain insight into those painful feelings. First of all, most people who watch painful feelings, they keep on watching. They don't gain all that much insight. Nothing happens. If they really did gain a lot of insight, they would have deep samadhi a long time ago. Actually, they don't get that deep samadhi, nor are they stream enterers, nor are they arahants. It doesn't seem to do very much to them. Watching painful feeling, and maybe they think they have some insight, but going by the results of the meditation, actually, they didn't really have any great insight anyway. It is like just a way we are used to talking about meditation as if it is the right way of doing it. But the Buddha says, no, you don't have to do it this way. All you have to do is to enjoy the pleasant feelings, and you will infer, you will understand the bad feelings through their absence. Such a wonderful thing, isn't it? Isn't that kind of good news? It is the best news that I can think of, that we don't have to go through all the pain. I am on this spiritual path because I want to enjoy myself, because I want a good life. I'm here because I want to overcome suffering, not because I want to wallow and indulge in the suffering and the pain of the body. So don't fall for that trap and watching unpleasant feeling. The body is unpleasant enough as it is. There's always going to be some degree of unpleasant feeling in the body. That is the nature of the body. Don't create unnecessary unpleasant feeling by forcing yourself to sit in the same posture for long, long periods of time. The eventual outcome of doing that is that you're going to end up giving up being a Buddhist. You're going to become a Christian or an atheist or I don't know what, but you're not going to be a Buddhist anymore because being a Buddhist is so blooming painful. Who on earth wants to be a Buddhist when you have to experience so much pain? Don't do that. That is not what we're supposed to do as Buddhists. It is some of the modern meditation movements, and to my mind, they have got it wrong. This is not what meditation really is about. Or if they haven't got it wrong, we can maybe say that it is possible to do it that way, but it's not the highway. It is not the main way as described by the Buddha in the suttas. So this is the first thing to understand about this, which is so powerful. So understanding these things right, if you read just the Satipatthana Sutta, just this sutta, you could be excused for thinking that you have to experience all the pain, because it says right there, experience pain, observe pain. Well, actually, if you read the other suttas, you understand that there's a broader context to this, and there's different ways of understanding these things, different ways of knowing these things, and only then can you approach these things in the best possible way. Specifically, make sure you read the Anapanasati Sutta. It's very powerful and very, very useful. The second thing which is interesting here is that all the worldly feelings, they are here called material feelings. All those material worldly feelings, you don't have to experience either. It talks about material pleasant feelings, worldly pleasant feelings. Well, that means indulging in the five senses. Don't have to do that. In fact, we shouldn't do that. That's not the point of the Buddhist path. You can practice the whole path through merely the spiritual feelings, the spiritual happy feelings. That is all that you need. The spiritual happy feelings, the joy and the bliss that come in meditation, through the meditation. So what does that mean? And what that means when you see this list of 9 feelings here, there is 2 kinds of feelings that are really important here. And the 2 kinds of feeling that are important is this one here. Spiritual pleasant feelings. This is one that is really important, yeah? Because this is what we experience when we experience joy, happiness, and peace in our meditation. The other feeling that is important, but is much more profound, is the one down here, the spiritual neutral feeling here, yeah? This is also fundamental, because this is what happens when we go through the jhana states in a very profound way here. These are the two feelings that are by far the most important of all of these. There's 9 feelings there. These are the most 2 important ones. And really, all you have to experience when contemplating feeling is these 2. It's enough to experience these 2. Spiritual pleasant feeling and spiritual neutral feeling. That is all you have to experience. Isn't that wonderful? I don't know, when I do this kind of analysis, and when I try to understand the suttas correctly, when I compare them, and I see that this is the logical conclusion of comparing Satipatthana with Anapanasati, I feel it's such a wonderful thing here. Because again, it directs your mind in the right direction. It allows you to decide what actually is important. Yeah, it tells you how we should meditate. We should be watching the breath. And as we watch the breath, we should try to move towards the spiritual rapture and the spiritual sukha, the pleasant feelings, ultimately leading to the neutral feelings. It gives you a guide for what you should be doing. What you should not be doing is watching the breath, then feel after that, think that's the end of the breath meditation, then go to the feelings of the body and feel the feelings in the body, which often are very painful, feeling these feelings all the time. That is what we should not be doing here. This guides you in the right way. And the guide is so uplifting. Such a positive guide when you see these things in the right way. It is such a marvelous meditation practice. Yeah, this is what really comes out of this. So for this reason, it is really worthwhile. This kind of analysis is actually incredibly important because it allows us to see the broader picture here. So let's just quickly finish off the feelings. And so they meditate observing an aspect of feeling internally, externally, both internally and externally. So internally means in relation to yourself, yeah, because you know your own feelings. Externally means that you know by inference that other people will also experience these feelings. And then you make a universal conclusion that this is true for all beings. All beings have these kind of feelings internally and externally. You make a universal observation of this. So this is the samadhi part. When we do this kind of observation, it leads to samadhi down the track. And then you have the vipassana part, which is about seeing the originating, the vanishing, and the originating and vanishing. This comes after the samadhi. And ultimately then it leads to the mindfulness is established, that feelings exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. They meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. And that's where you come to the very end of the Buddhist path. Stream entry, and all the other aspects of being a noble individual. That is how a mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of feelings. So that is the second Satipatthana for you, and just some of the insights you can gain by looking at this in a comparative perspective. After the break, we will come back to the Chitta Vipassana, contemplation of the mind.